The Chemical and Physical Changes Lab is a series of miniature experiments where you're going to be performing some kind of change. You're going to record a before and an after mass for each change and find the change in mass. You're also going to be recording qualitative observations. So the mass of the water before freezing is 26.90 grams. Make sure to record those qualitative observations as we go along. You'll also be identifying if each change is a chemical or a physical change, and you'll have to make a particle diagram. So the mass of the ice after we froze it is 26.90 grams. Lab 2 is pulling apart steel wool, where the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the mass of just the glass plate on its own. The glass plate has a mass of 42.89 grams. Then we add the little ball of steel wool so that we can get its mass before we pull it apart. Mass before for the steel wool is 44.29 grams. Now we're going to take the steel wool off of the balance so that we can pull it apart. And so by pulling it apart, we're going to increase the volume of the steel wool a lot. So we're essentially going to make it really fluffy, and we're going to make it take up way more space than it did before. The steel wool, as you handle it in this way, has a tendency to shed little tiny pieces. So we're also going to be really careful to make sure all of those little pieces end up still on the glass plate. And then when we take the mass again, what we can see is that the balance goes right back to zero. It's still 44.29 grams. So the before mass is still the same mass as we had for the last lab, 44.29 grams. Now before we burn it, we're going to make sure we take it off of the scale so we don't damage the scale in any way from the heat. Again, make sure you're recording those qualitative observations for each of the changes that we observe. Now that it's finished burning, you should notice that there has been a color change on the steel wool. And now we're going to put it back on the balance, and we are going to get its mass after burning. The mass after burning is 44.51 grams. Lab 4 is dissolving sugar. So we have water in the beaker in the left, and we have a little bit of sugar in the beaker on the right. We're going to put them both on the balance together, and then we are going to get the mass before we dissolve the sugar. The before mass is 160.61 grams. Then we're going to take the beakers off of the balance. We're going to add the water to the sugar. And then we're going to gently swirl the mixture of sugar and water until the sugar is dissolved. Again, being very careful while swirling not to spill any water out of the beaker. When we take the aftermass, we again need to make sure that both beakers are on the balance when we take that mass. The mass after dissolving is 160.61 grams. Lab 5 is dissolving Alka-Seltzer. So in the beaker on the left, I have an Alka-Seltzer tablet. Beaker on the right is water. We're going to put both beakers on the balance to get our mass before dissolving. The mass before is 164.81 grams. Then I'm going to take my water and I'm going to slowly add it to the Alka-Seltzer tablet. And we should see right away that the tablet reacts with the water by fizzing and bubbling as a gas is being produced when the two mix together. Now we're going to wait until the Alka-Seltzer tablet has fully dissolved and the bubbling has stopped before we take our aftermass. The mass after the Alka-Seltzer is fully dissolved is 164.10 grams. Our last lab is going to be to combine sodium carbonate and calcium chloride. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put about 10 milliliters of each compound into my beakers, starting with sodium carbonate. So I'm just going to estimate roughly 10 milliliters of sodium carbonate into that beaker. Then we're going to get the calcium chloride and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to, again, estimate roughly 10 milliliters of calcium chloride into the other beaker. Then we're going to put both beakers on the balance together so that we can get our before mass. The before mass is 110.00 grams. Now I'm going to carefully pour the sodium carbonate into the calcium chloride. We should observe a very immediate color change when that happens. Putting both beakers back on the balance to get our aftermass, which is 110.00 grams. Again, make sure you fill out all of the questions and analysis associated with this lab.